As U.S. President Donald Trump calls on allies to support protecting commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand says Canada's focus is on the de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East.
The position of our country will be to continue to indicate that there should be no weaponization of international shipping lanes, period. And that includes the Strait of Hormuz. Our current conversation with Gulf countries rests on how we can continue to support them, especially in the face of indiscriminate attacks, retaliatory in nature, by Iran.
With all eyes on the Gulf, another conflict is at risk of being overlooked. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today with an appeal to other world leaders.
The focus must remain on Ukraine. There is obviously a conflict in Iran going on in the Middle East, but we can't lose focus on what's going on in Ukraine. Putin can't be the one who benefits from the conflict in Iran.
Joining me now is Defense Minister David McGuinty, who was visiting today the Rochelle production facility in Brampton, which is currently producing armored vehicles for Ukraine. Nice to see you, Minister. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, JP.
Let's start with Ukraine and your announcement today. By all accounts, Moscow seems to be thrilled with the recent events in the Middle East. Of course, oil prices have surged, which is a huge benefit to their petro-state. The U.S. is churning through munitions that could have been earmarked for Ukraine. The focus is really far from Vladimir Putin's war. Still, Canada is providing some more equipment. Tell me about this new commitment you made today.
Well, this contribution of almost 400 armored vehicles builds on about 250 that we provided previously, JP. This is desperately needed on the ground. We, of course, work with Ukraine directly to get a sense of what their needs are. This is a perfect example of a Canadian company obviously providing important material for this war, which is being prosecuted by very brave Ukrainians. But it also indicates that we are building a whole new expanded industrial defense base here in Canada as part of our defense industrial strategy. Many countries, including Ukraine itself, has come to Rochelle here in Brampton in southwestern Ontario to order these vehicles and have been using them on the field there in the ground for several years. So we have not taken our foot off the accelerator here. We are paying very close attention to what's going on in that particular area as that war is being prosecuted. And we're there. We're with our Ukrainian colleagues. We are providing an additional $2 billion of material support in the new fiscal year coming. This will continue. We are convinced that the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian armed forces are going to win this battle. But we would also like to see this come to an end and come to a cessation of hostilities sooner than later.
Well, there's a question about whether it will end, because we heard from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He was speaking to reporters, and he says that the only way this conflict comes to a close is if Ukraine agrees to all of Putin's demands. He wants the Donbass, yes, but there's more. No peacekeeping force on the ground in Ukraine, no NATO membership for Ukraine, demilitarization of the country. Prime Minister Mark Carney was just meeting with his Nordic counterparts. I know you were on hand for that. Then there was this meeting with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. What does this mean? What does Russia's position mean for the coalition of the willing when there seems to be no end in sight?
It means we go back to the negotiating table and we start negotiating. And we try to enlist the United States again to provide their good offices to be able to pull the parties together. We go back at it because that's not an offer. That's not a negotiation. That's a very hard position being put forward by the Russians. But we've got to go back at this and start again and start the dialogue so we can find a proper outcome that will lead to first a cessation of hostilities and then secondly an end to the war.
Let's talk about the Middle East, which of course is top of mind for most people right now. President Trump is lashing out at NATO allies again today, criticizing countries like Canada for providing no military support to help with the U.S. war effort against Iran. Have you faced any blowback from the Americans over Canada's position?
Well, first of all, it's important for Canadians to remember that we were not consulted before this war began being prosecuted by the United States and Israel. Secondly, we have not been involved in the prosecution of this war. And thirdly, we're not going to be involved in the prosecution of this war. So we made that very plain for weeks now, since this began. We've not had any formal overture here to us in Canada. NATO has not had any formal overture, to my knowledge. We're working with my colleagues at NATO now. Look, the president's going to say what he's going to say. We can only manage what we can manage here. We control what we can control. And what we can control is to do a few things. First of all, let's get our Canadians out of the region, those that want to get out of there. We've got a team here in Canada and teams across the Middle East to do just that. And secondly, I have a high obligation, a very serious obligation, JP, to make sure that our Canadian Armed Forces members in the region are safe and sound. And they are now, and we're making sure that they are. We're monitoring the situation hour by hour, day by day. It's a very fluid, very dangerous situation. We don't know what the Iranians will do. We don't know how they will respond. There seems to be no coherence at this stage. So we're watching it very carefully, and we will govern ourselves accordingly.
But aren't you worried about the possible consequences of refusing to participate militarily? I mean, Trump said to the Financial Times that NATO faces a very bad future if the U.S., if the allies don't really come through and help them out. And of course, that alliance is so central to Canada's security. Now you've got the U.S. president saying that all its members have been very foolish. That seems to be a troubling development, doesn't it?
Well, listen, first thing to remember is Canada is extremely dedicated to the alliance. We have been. We've really increased our presence. We've increased our spending, our 2% by March 31st, for example. So we're going to continue to remain steadfastly supportive of NATO. All of the members will as well. And for that matter, I believe the United States will as well. I think they understand that we've all got different roles to play. We've come together. We're taking a very leadership role. Canada is on the Ukrainian front. For example, we've got 3,000 members of our forces at our forward operating location in Latvia, 14-nation multinational brigade that Canada is commanding. We have our job cut out for us on that front, for example. So look, we're going to take stock of what the situation is hour by hour. I'll be talking to my NATO colleagues. We will continue to dialogue and come together. And for that matter, we're just going to monitor this at this stage. But we have other responsibilities, as I say, like getting Canadians out of there and making sure that our Canadian forces are safe.
You mentioned coherence. We had retired Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie on the program yesterday, and he told me there really is no coherence to what Trump is prosecuting over there in the Middle East. And he said Canada should stay as far away as possible from this conflict. He says that we really can't trust Trump and the American armed forces he leads to back up Canadian sailors and warships if we were to send them over there and things go awry. Is that why Canada hasn't provided any assistance to this point? We just really don't trust the Americans to be a reliable partner right now?
We haven't jumped into the fray and entered into offensive capabilities because this is not our war. This is a war that was declared by Israel and the United States. We've been very clear from the beginning. We were not consulted, we have not been active, and we're not going to be active. I have said, however, that if any of the neighboring states in and around Iran may need some help from Canada, for example, on critical infrastructure, water systems, we'll take close note of that. We're watching it carefully. In terms of the coherence or incoherence of that, JP, I'll leave that to the operational experts in the Canadian Armed Forces. General Leslie has a background. He's got good experience. But I think right now I'll take my advice from those folks who have got their finger on the pulse. They're getting just in time, hour by hour updates on what's happening. So right now we've made our decision. We're monitoring closely. And like I say, we will govern ourselves accordingly.
You mentioned the Gulf states. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand said today that Canada is considering ways to potentially protect the Gulf states if there is further missiles and drones from Iran, which we know there was today, in fact. Is there any military options on the table with respect to that? If Canada is called upon by its allies to help, is there something that you're considering?
Look, it is in the nature of the Department of Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces to be prepared and to put forward options for consideration. But at this time, no. We weren't consulted, we have not been active, and we will not be active in the offensive nature of this war. Now, if there's help to be provided in terms of getting people out or assisting with desalination water plants or looking at some other elements of support for neighboring states, states with whom we have a relationship, states with whom we are building stronger relationships, we'll look at all of those alternatives. We'll look at all those eventualities, JP. But right now, we're not in that situation. We're really in a situation of monitoring. It's a very fluid situation, very unpredictable one. In particular, in terms of these missiles being sent, these drones being sent out of Iran, very, very unpredictable, very seemingly incoherent and sporadic. So we'll, again, take close note of what's happening, and we will react if we have to.
You mentioned protecting Canadian personnel in the region. Of course, an airstrike hit a Kuwaiti base where some Canadian Armed Forces personnel were stationed. There has been some criticism of how the military handled this. Some folks are saying other countries are more transparent about this war and its risks. Your conservative defense critic says it's really shameful, frankly, that Canadians have been left in the dark about what went on in Kuwait. Will you commit to provide more transparency? Don't the people here in this country have a right to know what's going on with their armed forces?
They have a right to know, as long as it has no bearing on the operational security and the security of the armed forces, women and men who may be serving in the region. I can't put these individuals at risk. And calls to put them at risk by revealing information that should not be revealed is, I think, sort of reckless. It's dangerous. And as I said just a little while ago, I really would like the leader of the official opposition, Mr. Poilievre, with all due respect to him and the role he plays, I would like him to get a top secret clearance so he can come in and get actually briefed on the situation on the ground. I think he would have a better understanding of the importance of making sure that this information is kept confidential because of the risk it might put our men and women in terms of harm's way. That's why this is my highest obligation, to make sure that these good serving members are not put in danger, and they're not. We made sure that they are safe and sound.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Defense Minister David McGuinty. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, JP.